Let's just jump right into this explainer. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're unpacking some absolutely mind-blowing ideas about wealth, greed, and happiness, all coming from Morgan Housel's phenomenal work. We're going to completely flip traditional financial wisdom right on its head. Here's the core premise. Doing well with money, it actually has very little to do with how smart you are and literally everything to do with how you behave. It's a huge claim, I know, but stick with me because we're going to prove it. So check out this wild real-world paradox. On one side, we've got Ronald Reed. He was the very first person in his rural Vermont family to even graduate high school. He hitched rides to campus, fixed cars at a gas station for 25 years, swept floors at JCPenney, and chopped firewood for fun. Just a regular guy, right? Now look at the other side, Richard Fiscone. This guy was a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with an MBA. People praised him for his massive business savvy and integrity. He was so successful, he literally retired in his 40s. But here's the kicker. When Ronald Reed died in 2014 at 92, he left behind an estate worth $8 million. Richard Fiscone, around that exact same time, ended up bankrupt. His 18,000 square foot mansion was sold off in a foreclosure auction. So how on earth does a rural janitor completely crush a decorated finance executive? Which brings us to Section 1, the greatest show on earth. Well, the answer to that paradox is actually pretty simple. Ronald Reed was just incredibly patient. He saved what little he could, he bought blue-chip stocks, and then he just waited. He waited decades for those tiny savings to compound into an $8 million fortune. Fiscone, on the other hand, got greedy. In the mid-2000s, he borrowed heavily to expand a mansion, we're talking 11 bathrooms and 2 pools, that cost $90,000 a month just to maintain. So when the 2008 financial crisis hit, all that high debt and illiquid assets basically turned his finances to dust. And this highlights a really profound truth. Finance is a soft skill. It is not a hard science. I mean, think about it. In what other field could someone with absolutely zero college degree, no formal training, and no background massively outperform someone with the absolute best education and connections? You would never hear a story about Ronald Reed performing a heart transplant better than a Harvard-trained surgeon, right? Or designing a skyscraper better than top architects? It's impossible, because finance isn't like physics. It's not driven by rigid laws and math. It's driven by our behavior, our emotions, and our psychology. Moving on to Section 2, why no one is crazy. You know, we all do things with money that might look totally crazy to someone else, but the reality is, no one is actually crazy. Why? Well, because your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in the world, but they make up like 80% of how you think the world works. Let's look at a really counterintuitive example, the lotto. The lowest income households in the US spend an average of $412 a year on lotto tickets. Now get this. At the exact same time, 40% of Americans cannot scrape together $400 for an emergency. To a lot of us, blowing a safety net on a 1 in a million chance seems completely nuts. But if you just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second, you can kind of understand the logic. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, where getting a raise, taking a nice vacation, or buying a home feels entirely impossible, buying that lottery ticket is literally the only time they get to hold a tangible dream of the good stuff that wealthier people just take for granted. They aren't crazy. They're just paying for a dream. Every financial decision someone makes checks the boxes they need to check in that exact moment, based entirely on their unique worldview. Let's see how this plays out across different generations. If we map out what the stock market did during a person's most impressionable years, their teens and 20s, this fascinating picture starts to emerge. Take a look here. If you were born in 1970, which is that dark line, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold during your young adult life. That's a massive wealth-generating machine. You'd probably love the stock market. But look at the lighter line. If you were born in 1950, the market went literally nowhere during those exact same formative years. So these two groups are going through life with completely different, yet equally deeply ingrained views on whether the stock market is a safe place for their hard-earned cash. And we see the exact same thing happen with inflation. If you were born in 1960, as the dark line shows, prices roughly tripled during your teens and 20s. You probably vividly remember gas lines. You remember your paycheck stretching less and less every single week. Because of that, you have this deep-seated fear of inflation. But if you were a 1990 baby, that's the flat light line at the bottom, inflation has been so incredibly low for your entire life that you've probably never even thought about it. You just don't share those same financial fears because, honestly, you haven't lived the same financial history. So the big takeaway here is that we're all operating on entirely different historical baselines. But beyond even that,
a lot of the financial concepts we use today are basically brand new. Just look at this historic drop in labor force participation for men over 65. Before World War II, most Americans basically just worked until they died. Retirement wasn't really a thing. And the 401k, the absolute backbone of American retirement savings, it wasn't even invented until 1978. The Roth IRA didn't show up until 1998. We're all essentially total newbies trying to navigate a brand new system. No wonder we're so prone to making mistakes, right?
Let's head into Section 3, Siblings, Luck, and Risk.
Okay, so if our internal psychology is so diverse, what about the external forces out there? That brings us to luck and risk. It's the harsh reality that every outcome in life is influenced by forces completely outside of your own individual effort. I mean, we're just one person in a game with 7 billion other players and infinite moving parts. Let me tell you an amazing story that captures this perfectly. We all know Bill Gates, right? Well, back in 1968, he happened to attend Lakeside School in Seattle, which was literally one of the only high schools in the entire world that had a computer. He and his classmate Paul Allen got completely obsessed with it. But there was actually a third prodigy in their little group, Kent Evans. Gates actually remembers Kent as the best student in the class. He was just as smart, just as ambitious, and was always scheming with Gates about how they'd become CEOs together. Kent could have so easily been a founding partner of Microsoft. But it never happened. Tragically, Kent died in a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school.
When you look at the math behind their intertwined stories, it is just staggering. In 1968, the odds of a high school-age student attending the one school in the world with a computer was roughly 1 in a million. Bill Gates experienced a 1 in a million stroke of pure, unadulterated luck. Ken Evans, on the flip side, experienced a 1 in a million dose of risk by dying on that mountain. It's the exact same force, the exact same magnitude, just working in completely opposite directions. And it just goes to show that not all success is due to hard work and not all failure is due to bad decisions.
This makes judging success incredibly tricky. Take Cornelius Vanderbilt, the famous railroad magnate. This guy wildly flaunted the law. He famously told an advisor, "My God, John, you don't suppose you can run a railroad in accordance with the statutes of the state of New York, do you?" He was wildly successful, so, it's super tempting to just call him a scrappy visionary and leave it at that. But where does that thin line between bold and reckless actually fall? Because a slight shift in luck, maybe a slightly less lenient judge, and Vanderbilt could have gone down in history not as a billionaire genius, but as a bankrupt criminal. When we ignore the massive roles that luck and risk play, we end up taking all the wrong lessons from people's success.
That brings us to Section 4, the danger of never enough.
So if the external world is just this chaotic storm of luck and risk, how do we actually survive it? Well, we have to build our own internal guardrails. We have to master the art of knowing when to stop. Because the danger of never enough is the ultimate wealth destroyer. To really grasp this, let's look at the tragic story of Rajat Gupta. His rise was absolutely phenomenal. He went from being an orphan in the slums of Calcutta to becoming the CEO of McKinsey, which is the world's most prestigious consulting firm. By 2008, Gupta had a net worth of $100 million. To put that in perspective, a 5% return on that much money generates almost $600 an hour, 24 hours a day. But for Gupta, it just wasn't enough. He desperately wanted to be in that elite billionaire circle. So while sitting on the board of Goldman Sachs during the 2008 financial crisis, he allegedly tipped off a hedge fund manager about an upcoming investment by Warren Buffett. He literally threw away his reputation, his legacy, and his freedom on insider trading, all because $100 million simply wasn't enough for him. Now let's contrast Gupta's endless, exhausting treadmill of greed with a much-needed palate cleanser. There's this great story about the authors Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22. They were at a party hosted by a billionaire, and Vonnegut points out to Heller that their host had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his massively famous novel over its entire history. Heller's response was just brilliant. He said, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." Wow. It is so stunning in its simple eloquence. Mastering that psychology of enough is really the only true way to protect yourself from the reckless, never-ending pursuit of more. And finally, Section 5, your psychology of money. To kind of wrap up this whole journey we've been on, true wealth just isn't a hard science. It's really not about your raw IQ or your ability to crunch complex compound interest formulas. It's about navigating your own personal history, your own biases. It's about having the humility to actually acknowledge those twin siblings of luck and risk that dictate so much of what happens to us. And above all, it's about mastering the profound psychological piece of knowing exactly when you have enough. So, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Take a hard look at your own life. Are your financial decisions genuinely being driven by a cold, logical spreadsheet? Or are they actually being driven by your hidden psychology, by the specific decade you were born in, by your ego, by your fears, or by the invisible stories you've been telling yourself for years? I really hope this explainer has given you some solid tools to look inward, evaluate your own financial paradigm, and start managing your money not just with math, but with a mastered mind. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible topic. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.